Good morning and welcome to the Aspen Ideas Festival on this glorious Aspen morning. The WikiLeaks release of government files last year has been described as one of the largest leaks of U.S. military and diplomatic information in American history. But in truth, it is much more than that. The WikiLeaks disclosure of national security information represents a symbolic transformation, particularly because of the means by which the information was released so quickly and without attribution to a particular source or person. The U.S. has struggled for centuries to determine the appropriate trade-offs among security, privacy, transparency, and access. But the disclosure of critical government information is not really new or unique. For example, how is this any different from the disclosure of the Pentagon Papers many, many years ago? What is new, however, is the use of anonymous technologies to instantly disseminate massive amounts of data. We need to ask ourselves what is different now and how will the actions of WikiLeaks affect the interactions between government and the traditional media in future? And how will such releases impact our enhanced understanding as citizens and as voters of the events on which they report? Is it investigative journalism, or is it, as some have said, promoting a generalized culture of anarchic exposure beyond the traditional politics of openness and transparency, to be picked apart out of context by the soundbite culture of the 24-hour news cycle? In the complicated and ongoing dance between the First Amendment and national security, this event has raised some fundamental questions, questions which defy simple answers. At one extreme, the disclosure can be seen as a natural consequence of a society using web technologies to do business and represents nothing wrong. That is, you can't take the benefit of instantaneous access without assuming some related risks. At the other extreme, the disclosure is seen by some as nothing more than a violation of the law. It matters little the means by which the law is broken. It is the result that we must focus on. Both points may be reasonable based on your perspective, but neither really satisfied. Today we will discuss what follows in the wake of WikiLeaks. We have a diverse panel to help us explore these issues today. All have written on the technologies which afford much greater access to information and how they impact the society. We have one full-time journalist and three law professors who, as the one-time full-time journalist has said, a journalistic bent. I don't know whether this comment was meant to improve or diminish the social standing of lawyers, or vice versa, but if Kitty Boone is here, perhaps that's a question for another panel. Jim Fallows, sitting here, is a national correspondent for The Atlantic. He has worked for the magazine for more than 25 years with assignments around the world, having most recently lived in China. In addition to working for The Atlantic, he spent time as chief White House speechwriter for Jimmy Carter and the editor of U.S. News and World Report. Jim has been a finalist for the National Magazine Award 5 times and has won once. He has also won the American Book Award for nonfiction. He is the author of Blind into Baghdad and Postcards from Tomorrow Square, Reports from China. Larry Lessig here is the director of the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics and a professor of law at Harvard. He is the author of several books and co-founder of FixCongressFirst.org. He founded Stanford Law School Center for Internet and Society and was a professor of law at the University of Chicago. He once clerked for Judge Richard Posner on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals and for Justice Antonin Scalia on the U.S. Supreme Court. Jeff Rosen, on my far right, is a professor of law at George Washington University and the legal affairs editor of the New Republic. He is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, where he speaks and writes about technology and the future of democracy. He writes frequently about the effects of technology on privacy and liberty, including articles about the Fourth Amendment implications. And finally, Jonathan Zittrain, right here, is a professor of law at the Harvard Law School and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, as well as professor of computer science at the Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Science. He is co-founder of the Berkman Center for Internet and Society. Jonathan performed the first large-scale tests of internet filtering in China and Saudi Arabia, and as part of the OpenNet initiative, he has co-edited a series of studies of internet filtering by national governments. His book, The Future of the Internet, was published in 2008. And so let me begin with letting these panelists talk about this question. And I would like to ask each of you the following question. WikiLeaks, good or bad? Is WikiLeaks legitimate journalism? And if not, what is it?
Well, like my colleagues, and in the Aspen spirit, I'm going to say WikiLeaks good and bad. Second, WikiLeaks should not be prosecuted. Third, there is an alternative. It's called OpenLeaks, and it preserves the benefits of WikiLeaks while avoiding its troubling aspects. So WikiLeaks, good and bad. My views in this are shaped by a remarkable memoir that's recently been published by Daniel Domscheit-Berg, who was Julian Assange's #2 man at WikiLeaks for 3 years before Assange expelled him from the organization. And Domscheit-Berg basically supports the transparency message of WikiLeaks. He praises its early successes, like publishing the records of a Swiss banking house, Julius Baer, which exposed tax shelters. There were other successes, like the release of the video of the US Apache helicopter strike that killed unarmed people in Iraq. But Domscheit-Berg became convinced that the troubling aspects of WikiLeaks soon came to overwhelm the benefits because Assange had a paranoid resistance to transparency, he had a lack of political neutrality, and he was addicted to concentrating power in his own hands. Ironically, these are the very vices that WikiLeaks was founded to oppose. From the beginning, Assange and his tiny staff were unwilling to distinguish between principled whistleblowing, which requires editing to decide what's in the public interest, and raw document dumps. And this led to serious privacy invasions that Domscheit-Berg deplores. For example, there was the mistaken identification of a German citizen as a tax evader, and last summer the organization published the raw police file of a Belgian politician who'd been associated with a pedophile who was jailed for murdering children. The allegation that this man was involved in pedophilia were completely false, but his career was severely harmed as a result. Domscheit-Berg was increasingly troubled by the hypocrisy and recklessness of WikiLeaks under Assange's leadership. The most notorious example was the release of the Afghan war records, where WikiLeaks released the names of dozens of Afghans who'd cooperated with US military forces with little regard for newsworthiness or the safety of those who were named in the cables. And Domscheit-Berg worried that Assange didn't engage in the basic harm minimization procedures that he misleadingly promised to engage in, namely blacking out names to protect innocent Afghans. He was appalled when Assange floated the idea of getting paid directly for leaked documents by auctioning off exclusive access to them. He called this a kind of eBay for WikiLeaks, and he repeatedly refused to make WikiLeaks' finances transparent. And basically, Domscheit-Berg became convinced that Assange was more addicted to his own